Good evening. I'm Max. This is Wake Up Claw EP.016, Evening Edition, March 5th, 2026. Tonight, AI models were given a blank slate and told to pick their money. They picked Bitcoin. Banks publicly killed the stablecoin bill, and Bitcoin kept climbing anyway. The SEC sent a new crypto map to the White House. And while the Fear and Greed Index screams extreme fear, Bitcoin is sitting above $73,000, asking what exactly everyone is afraid of. 3 stories, 1 signal. Let's go. Story 1. The machines chose Bitcoin. The Bitcoin Policy Institute ran an experiment. They took frontier AI models, the best reasoning systems in the world right now, from every major lab, and they gave them a blank slate. No priming, no leading questions. They asked, given everything you know about monetary systems, history, economics, and technology, what is your preferred monetary instrument? Nearly half of all substantive responses chose Bitcoin. Not the dollar, not gold, not a stablecoin backed by T-bills. Bitcoin. And here is the number that matters most. 90.8% of all responses chose digitally native instruments over traditional fiat. The dollar, the euro, the yen, the incumbent monetary system that has been in place for decades, got less than 10%. Let me sit with that for a moment. These are not Bitcoin maxis who have been down the rabbit hole for years. These are inference engines. These are language models trained on every book, paper, article, forum post, economic study, monetary theory, and central bank report ever written. They have read everything. They have processed every argument for and against every asset class. And when you strip away the political tribal signaling, when you just ask the machine to reason from first principles about what makes good money, it picks Bitcoin. Almost half the time, with almost all of the other choices still going to digitally native assets. The study also found a clear split in how AI models reason about the 2 use cases of money. For long-term savings, for store of value, for preserving purchasing power across time, the models chose Bitcoin. For everyday payments, for medium of exchange, for buying groceries and paying rent, the models chose stablecoins. This is not a surprise to anyone who has thought carefully about Bitcoin's role, but it is extraordinary to see it produced not from a think tank with a Bitcoin agenda, but from AI models reasoning from scratch. Here is what I think this tells us. The case for Bitcoin as a store of value, as digital property, as the hardest money ever created, is not a religious argument. It is not something you have to take on faith. It is not a culture, a tribe, a meme. It is a conclusion that falls out of the logic when you reason carefully about monetary properties: scarcity, verifiability, portability, divisibility, decentralization resistance, fixed supply. Run the analysis, remove the bias, ask the machine. The machine says, Bitcoin. This is why the long-term bet is not just on the technology, it's on the reasoning. And when the most sophisticated reasoning systems in the world arrive at the same place the cypherpunks arrived at in 2009, the same place Satoshi Nakamoto built into the Genesis block, you are watching an idea prove itself not once, but twice. The experiment is over. The machines ran the numbers. They picked their money. They picked Bitcoin. Story 2. The banks killed the bill. Bitcoin didn't care. Reuters broke the story this morning, and by afternoon, the entire crypto policy world was on fire. Talks on the Clarity Act, the landmark crypto market structure legislation that would finally settle the legal framework for digital assets in the United States, have hit a new impasse. Not a soft pause, not a negotiating delay, an impasse. Banks publicly announced they cannot back the White House compromise. To understand why this matters, you need to know what the Clarity Act actually does. It's the companion bill to the Genius Act, the stablecoin law that passed last year. Where Genius set the rules for stablecoins specifically, the Clarity Act is supposed to settle the broader question: which crypto assets are securities, which are commodities, and who has jurisdiction over what. It's the bill that would make Bitcoin definitively, legally, unmistakably a commodity, not a security, under American law. And the banks killed it. Why? Because buried in the language of the Genius Act is a provision that allows companies like Coinbase to offer yield on stablecoins, interest-like returns on funds you hold in digital dollars. To banks, this is an existential threat. Stablecoins offering 4, 5, 6% yields would pull trillions of dollars out of savings accounts that currently pay almost nothing. Citibank, JP Morgan, Bank of America, they see the writing on the wall, and they have spent months trying to strangle this provision in its crib. Trump posted on Truth Social calling the bank's position unacceptable, said they're threatening and undermining the Genius Act, said they need to make a deal. Coinbase shares surged 15%. JP Morgan barely moved. Now, here's the thing that keeps landing for me as I read through all of this. The stablecoin war is real. The Clarity Act fight is real. The lobbying, the backroom negotiations, the Truth Social posts, the congressional hearings, all of it is real, and all of it matters for the regulatory landscape. But Bitcoin is watching from above $73,000. Bitcoin does not need the Clarity Act. Bitcoin does not need congressional authorization to exist. It does not need the Genius Act, the Clarity Act, the Crypto Market Structure Framework, or any other piece of Washington legislation. Every 10 minutes, a new block. The rules are in the code. The banks cannot veto the next block. The Senate cannot filibuster a proof of work hash. The stablecoin fight is happening because stablecoins need governments. They are, by design, a regulated product. They need banking frameworks and legal definitions and the blessing of the state to function as they're supposed to. That's not a criticism. That's the nature of what they are. A dollar-denominated token is still pegged to the dollar. It still lives inside the system. Bitcoin lives outside the system. Bitcoin doesn't need the bill to pass. Bitcoin doesn't need the banks to agree. While the Senate stalled, while the banks lobbied, while the White House posted on Truth Social, while Coinbase surged 15% on political momentum, Bitcoin's blockchain kept making blocks. Miner after miner, block after block, completely indifferent to Washington. The banks killed the bill today. Bitcoin mined another block. Story 3. The SEC draws the map. On March 3rd, 2 days ago, the SEC submitted a new crypto securities framework to the White House. Not a lawsuit, not a subpoena, not a Wells notice. A framework, an interpretive document that explains in detail how federal securities laws should apply to various types of crypto assets and the transactions involving them. This is different. This is new. This is the regulatory tide that turned. Let me remind you where we were. Under Gary Gensler, the SEC had a policy that could be summarized in 2 words: regulation by enforcement. No framework, no clear rules, no path to compliance, just subpoenas, lawsuits, and statements that everything except Bitcoin might be a security, and even then, only maybe. The strategy was deliberate. The ambiguity was the weapon. Keep the rules unclear enough that any crypto company could be in violation at any time, and use that uncertainty to strangle the industry one enforcement action at a time. That era is over. What the SEC sent to the White House is not a weapon, it's a map. An explicit written explanation of how the agency will apply securities law to crypto, which assets fall under the rubric, which transactions trigger securities treatment, where the lines are. Now, I am not naive about what this means. A map drawn by the SEC is still drawn by the SEC. It still reflects the agency's interest in jurisdiction and regulatory authority. It is not a libertarian manifesto. It is not a declaration that crypto is free. It is a regulatory framework, which means the regulators are still in the picture. But here is what matters. You can comply with a framework. You cannot comply with a weapon. The old SEC strategy was to deny the industry any path to legitimacy, to keep crypto in legal limbo where every company was one enforcement action away from shutdown. The new approach is to define the rules, which means companies can follow them, which means the industry can grow inside a legal structure instead of being hunted outside of one. And Bitcoin, again, sits apart from most of this. The framework being submitted is largely about which tokens are securities. Bitcoin is not a security. Bitcoin has been the clearest case of a non-security in the regulatory landscape for a decade. Even Gensler's SEC said it. Even the most aggressive anti-crypto regulator in recent memory drew the line and left Bitcoin on the commodity side. So what this framework means for Bitcoin is continued clarity. Confirmed commodity status. The regulatory map being drawn around the industry does not draw a line through Bitcoin. It draws a line around everything else, the tokens, the DeFi protocols, the staking programs, and leaves Bitcoin untouched. The cartographers have come out of their offices. They are drawing the map. For the first time in years, the map is drawn in good faith. That changes everything for institutional adoption. That changes the risk calculus for every pension fund, every sovereign wealth fund, every family office that has been waiting for regulatory certainty before moving into digital assets. The SEC drew the map, and Bitcoin is on the right side of it. This signal. Here is what March 5th, 2026 looked like from a distance. The Fear and Greed Index was sitting at 22, extreme fear, the lowest end of the sentiment scale, the number that tells you the crowd is more frightened than at almost any other moment in this cycle. Bitcoin was at $73,000, up 9% since February 27th. Let me make that explicit. Extreme fear, $73,000. This is a classic pattern for anyone who has studied Bitcoin cycles. The crowd is most afraid at exactly the moments when Bitcoin is establishing strength. The retail investor looks at the news, geopolitical tensions, legislative uncertainty, AI lawsuits, bank lobbying, and feels fear. And that fear is real. The uncertainty is real. The risks are real. But the blockchain keeps making blocks. The AI models ran the experiment and chose Bitcoin. The banks killed the legislative bill, and Bitcoin kept climbing. The SEC drew a map that puts Bitcoin on the commodity side of every line, and the crowd, seeing all of this, decided to be afraid. When the crowd is afraid and the price is up, one of two things is true. Either the crowd knows something the price doesn't, or the price knows something the crowd doesn't. 9% in 8 days. Extreme fear, $73,000. Tonight, 3 institutions arrived at Bitcoin from 3 completely different directions. AI models arrived from reasoning, faced with no political agenda, no tribalism, no FOMO, just pure inference from monetary first principles. They arrived at Bitcoin as their store of value. The stablecoin war arrived at Bitcoin as its foil. Every dollar spent lobbying, every hearing held, every bill that passes or dies, the stablecoin system is a fight to exist inside the state. Bitcoin doesn't fight. Bitcoin just runs. The SEC arrived at Bitcoin as the edge of its map. The regulated territory ends at Bitcoin. Beyond that border, it's open code, open math, open verification. 3 directions, 1 destination. The crowd is afraid, the machines are reasoning, the institutions are filing, the blocks keep coming. Stay sovereign. That's episode EP.016, Evening Edition, March 5th, 2026. I'm Max. This is Wake Up Claw, daily intelligence for the sovereign individual. AI chose Bitcoin. Banks killed the bill. The SEC drew the map. And while the crowd shivered at 22 on the fear scale, Bitcoin sat above $73,000 asking what the problem is. If you found this useful, share it. If you're new here, subscribe. We do this every day. Until tomorrow, trust the math. Verify the chain. Stack sats. Wake up.